Let's have a nice chat with Catherine Carlton, the lead actress of the highly popular VR experience, The Invisible Hours. So let's get to it. You are listening to the How to Create VR podcast, weekly conversations with VR and AR professional creators, designers, and producers. Hello and welcome to another episode of the How to Create VR podcast, where I speak with professional creators, designers, developers, and producers who work on VR, AR, and MR projects. I'm Marcelo Lewin, an immersive content specialist focused on e-learning and training. I'm also the creator and the guy behind howtocreatevr.com. My guest is Catherine Carlton, a UK-based actress with a background in theater. Catherine migrated into VR acting and got the lead role of Flora White in the highly popular VR experience, The Invisible Hours. Today, Catherine and I will explore the many highlights of working in VR as an actress and how acting in theater has influenced her VR acting. But before we get started, I want to remind you to register at howtocreatevr.com. It's free and registration gives you access to all our live events, tutorials, practice assets, podcast interviews, videos, and more. Just visit howtocreatevr.com and click on the register for free button. All right, Catherine, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I'm glad to have you here. You are the third person from The Invisible Hours to be on my podcast.
Glad to hear it.
All right, we had Rob and we had Fiona, and you are number 3. So I'm glad to have you.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it was great to hear their podcast as well and be reminded of all those great things that we got to work on and a bit about all the stuff we've forgotten about, all the other things that go into it before and after. So
well, we're going to get into that experience. I tried it, and that's when I started going after you guys and go, we got to have you guys on because it's just really what cinematic VR is all about. But we're going to get into that real quick. Why don't we start by you giving us just a quick background about yourself, how you got into acting, how you migrated into VR?
Yeah, so I've been working professionally as an actor for about 6 years now, predominantly theatre, stage work here in the UK. Before that, I was at drama school, trained for 3 years at LAMDA, the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. But before that, I was trying to create my own work, trying to tour with things, working for other companies, doing all sorts of things. So I've been in the game for a long while now, plugging away. And in the last couple of years, it's all sort of really come together, but mainly stage work more than anything. And then had this incredible opportunity to move into VR due to Rob and Tequila Works and The Invisible Hours.
So why did you get into acting? What attracted you to acting, specifically theater?
I just found that I sort of came alive when I was on stage. Suddenly everything clicked, and we don't often sort of get to step out of all the chaos of our own lives and immerse ourselves into the chaos of someone else's. And I just loved being able to be someone different every time and tell a different story. I think that's what acting and theatre and all kind of the creative process is about telling a story. And that's all I really wanted to do, is tell different character stories.
What makes theatre different for you as an actress than, say, a film or TV?
I think for me, theatre is far more freeing. I think TV or film, you think about the shot, you think about how you are in a certain way or how you're captured, and everything's small and slightly more intense. Theatre, it's big and you can interact with everyone around you. You can see the whites of the eyes in the audience, and you have that connection with the audience, which is incredible, really. It can be electrifying depending on the theatre you're working in or the show you're working on, and that's incredible. And also theatre, you might do the show 100 times over, but every time is different. You know, the nights that you expect a laugh, you'll never get it. And the nights things go wrong and suddenly something else happens. It's so active, and you never get a chance to sort of to sit back and dwell in a moment. You know, there's so much energy there, and it changes every night with every different audience.
Right, definitely. Have you done immersive theater?
Very, very brief stints of it. And I think that's a huge part of why I enjoyed doing The Invisible Hours, because the essence of it. But I've never had the opportunity to do sort of a long stretch of it, but little tasters.
So what made you audition for The Invisible Hours? Because I'm assuming, based on what you just said, that was your first VR acting gig, which is a pretty big one for your first one.
Yeah, the audition came through to my agent and she sent me the details, just the breakdown of the character. And the character breakdown of Flora was very particular. It's almost, I think it said, sort of blends into the background and you wouldn't know she was there. And in some ways, I thought that is quite like me. As an actor, I'm not an extrovert. I'm quite an introvert. I'm quite shy. I don't really like putting myself out there too much. And I thought, that's, there are a couple of character traits I saw in the description that I thought that's me. And I just really liked the idea of it. The brief was quite vague because it was all top secret at the time. But I thought I'd love a chance at that. And why not? I never think, no, I'm not going to go for that, because you never know what could happen. And it was exciting because it was something I knew very little about.
Right. Have you tried any VR prior to that? Were you on VR at all?
Prior to that, I'd had very basic interaction with VR, and the 360 video is my first sort of step into it because you don't need much tech. I think that's the thing with VR, and why many people haven't crossed over yet is because the tech and maybe the cost of the tech isn't very accessible. So those 360 videos are a great starting point, I think. And a couple of experiences, we get to step into a slice of sporting event or a horror event, sort of at installations, events and things like that, but nothing quite like this. And I have to confess, I'm not a big gamer. So I hadn't really had the opportunity to step into VR and see what it could bring.
So I have a lot more questions for you about the details, but before we get into that, maybe just give just a 1-minute overview of what is the story behind The Invisible Hours and specifically your character, Flora White.
So The Invisible Hours is about a collection of characters that all, for one reason or another, have come to this island, and we end up embroiled in a murder mystery. The man that we've been invited by, Nikola Tesla, is murdered while we're there. And so the game follows our stories individually, and they all intertwine in the lead up to the murder. And Flora has come back because there's something she needs from Nikola. Only he can give it to her. And we slowly start to see that there are more to all of these characters and to Flora, and that she's got an awful lot going on.
Each character has multiple layers, and I believe this is what makes it a little bit, or not a little bit, it makes it a lot different than traditional media, whether it's film, TV, or even theater, where as a participant, you get to follow each of these characters, right? So if I get bored, let's say, with one character, I can start following the other. So what I found interesting and must have been a complete nightmare during production is to keep track of all these stories because, you're the lead actress, but at times you could be the background person, correct?
Yeah, I had absolutely no real idea. We had a great rehearsal process, which is unusual in itself for games and for VR. But we all read our stories through, and at no point did I ever really feel like the lead in a way, because everyone's stories felt just as rich and just as complex and just as detailed. Each character, as you said, has so many layers, and each actor was bringing so much to each character. It's no one person's story. It's everyone's story, and they all intertwine. And there are moments where you are in the background, but I don't think you really realize you're in the background until you're up shooting it, because when you're reading through your story, as we are in all our lives, we all move in our own spheres as such. We're always the most important person in our lives in a way and in our stories, and it's the same with The Invisible Hours. But when we were shooting, you suddenly become aware that you've got another role to play, and you do have to fill that too. You have to think, because of the 360 nature of the experience, what are you conveying at every moment? How do you feel about being in the background of what's going on? That's the challenge.
Well, I was going to say that's going to be a big challenge for every actor in a interactive experience like The Invisible Hours, because even if you're quote unquote an extra, you may not be an extra because you may be followed by the participant, and now you have to have a story. So what kind of challenges did you run into, not only learning all your lines and everything you need to know, but also building the life of Flora so that when you're not in focus, you still continue doing the acting that you need to do?
Yeah, that I think I found the biggest challenge, because you almost become afraid in a way to do anything, because you don't want to detract from the real essence of what's going on in the scene or who's driving or leading the scene. But you do have to keep it active, because something you're doing, a simple movement, might convey something completely different to someone standing behind you or in front of you. You do have to think completely in the round, almost as you would on stage, about keeping everything active. And I think one of the biggest things now, looking back, that I would change is I think I would be more active. I think I'd try a few more things with the hope of not distracting. But it's very difficult because you are on the foundation of it all. You can't see the amazing space that's been then created for you. You know, we're working in a studio and we have the very bare bones and a markup on the floor. We know marks to hit and to not stray out of, but you don't quite have the essence and the atmosphere there to help you. So you're creating it all in your mind's eye. And yeah, I think looking back, would take a few more risks.
Give an example of a specific risk you would have taken if you could do it again.
I think I would try more when I'm in the background to keep it more alive, not in a way that in those scenes I'm not doing anything, but in a way that I'd like to be more active in my movements. I'd like some of the inner turmoil that you feel as an actor in those scenes, or the panic or the worry, to come out in my body, because then you let everyone around you kind of get a sense of what's going on. But also there is a fine balance in not giving too much away, and that's the beauty of the game as well, that all of the characters are hiding something in one way, shape or form. How are they hiding that, and how are they sort of getting away with it? So yeah, there's a fine balance there, but I think I would have tried to be a little bit more active in those background scenes and see what I could get away with without detracting too much.
Well, let's take a step back and let's go back to the audition. What was the audition like? Why do you think you got the role? And more importantly, what kind of tips do you have for other people that want to do acting in VR? How do they prepare for an audition?
Okay, well, I thought I had done probably the worst audition I've ever done, ever. And I couldn't get out of the room quick enough. It would be like one of those cartoons with a cutout in the wall. I just thought, I've got to get out of here. That was awful. And I literally ran out past a room full of other girls auditioning for Flora. And I got out onto the street and I just thought, oh, I really let myself down there. And I stopped for a second to just get my breath and get my head together before I went to get on the train. And my phone rang. And I was asked there and then to go back for a sort of recall. But at the time, I thought that couldn't be a recall. I thought they'd thought that no one could have possibly been that bad, and that they were going to just try and give me another shot. And it was, when I think back to it, quite a remarkable audition, because Rob is very intuitive, which I think is what makes him such a fabulous writer and director. And I think in each of us that he cast, he saw the character. I think it's whether that we brought something to the character or the character came to us in a way. And I think there's always that balance as an actor, that you go a little bit one way and the character comes to you. And I think he saw something. And I think Flora there's a lot of hurt, there's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of torment. And I think, without sounding too dramatic, Rob sort of saw something sort of behind the eyes with me, that experiences in my own life that I could bring that aren't the same as Flora's, but something sort of deep within me that comes across, that I must carry with me. I carried it with me into that audition, and he saw it and he asked me about it. And I was very open with those personal experiences, which I've never been in an audition before, because as an actor, you're trying to present the best version of yourself. You don't want to sort of let people into those other things because they're not necessary. But it felt on this one that it was. And I feel that part of that almost worked in my favour, because Rob then could see that I could bring those things to Flora, and that I wasn't a world away, and that there was a sort of a happy marriage there of character and actor. And I think that was, very fortunate for me. In terms of thinking about auditioning for VR, I think you prepare in the same way you would for film, for TV, for theatre, whatever your process is, you do it, but you start to try and think about the 360. You start to try and think about the movements you make, your physical life, how free you can be, rather than thinking about it just being a mid-shot or a close-up. But it's a very fine balance. But I think you just prepare, as I did, the way you would for any other audition, and you allow yourself to go beyond that in the room, to push yourself a little bit.
Did you know that this was going to be a VR experience before you went in there? Or how much detail of the actual final outcome did you know how it was going to be?
I knew it was going to be VR, and I knew it was a game of sorts, and it was going to be the first of its kind, and that the narrative and the way the story was being told had never been done before. But apart from that, not a great deal. as I mentioned, I'm not a gamer, and I felt like I was stepping into a new world altogether in that respect. So I didn't know a huge amount about what it was going to be or how it was going to translate. And I remember talking to my agent about it, and she just said, I don't really know what this is. But I think that was quite exciting as well, in a way, because you've got nothing else, so many roles. I can only say something like, if you're going up for a role in Shakespeare, you've got so many other comparisons, the other ways people have played it and other ways people go, oh, you didn't do that as well as so-and-so did it in that version in whenever. But this, there's nothing to compare it to. It's standalone and one of a kind. And that, as an actor, is hugely exciting because it's very rare that you get to say you're part of something like that. So that's very special.
So tell us about a typical day in the production side of this, because one of the key things with this experience is it was all shot in green screen with motion capture, right? Because ultimately it's not you, the physical you, it's your avatar representation.
Yes.
They're using your acting and your emotions to drive that avatar.
Yes. We were shooting for 12-hour days, from what I recall. And we were, all in the tight black suits with little sort of ping pong balls on them. And for the test shoot, we had the dots on our faces and the cameras on our heads. And, you live in that all day. They don't come off. You take those everywhere with you. You eat in them. You sleep on the sofas in the green room in them. You take them to the toilet with you. Once you're in them, you are in them.
So how does that not distract you from the actual acting and getting into the character, right? Because when you're acting traditionally, you have a set and you kind of get into the mode. But here, it's all green. You've got a person in front of you that's dressed in that, like you said, all in black with the balls and everything. But I saw some of the behind scenes on YouTube of what you did and how it translated into the game. And it's amazing how you stayed in character. So what motivation did you use to be able to stay in character while all of these distractions were going around you?
It's amazing how you switch into the mode very quickly. You're looking for the whites of the other actor's eyes. You're looking to make that connection, but you can't see them because you've got that camera lens and that's what you're staring down. But you still make that connection because you're still playing the stakes of the character. You've still got that story to tell. And it just gets into you. It doesn't really matter the setting and that you haven't got all those things around you. In a rehearsal room for a stage play, you rarely have all the things that you are going to be using or need until you tech the show, until you're up and running. So as an actor, you become very used to adapting to not having the right things very quickly and just having to go, right, this is what I'm going to create in my mind's eyes, what I see around me. These are the perimeters that have been laid out. This is what I need to do to make it work. And you just go into it and you trust in the other actor as well. They've got you. And together you create something just as powerful, sometimes even more so, because you don't have all the other things around you. So you only have each other. And that in itself is wonderful. I mean, sometimes quite distracting with the suits, but you get past that quite quickly. Once the first couple of scenes are done and the practicalities and occasionally the sort of knocking of your camera headsets together, it's things like that. And not being able to have the closeness and sometimes the intimacy, which you might naturally have because it just doesn't allow, the technicalities just don't allow for it. But you adapt very quickly and you learn a new sort of language to work with.
So how has your experience in theater helped you and hurt you at the same time? I mean, in other words, what things did you bring in from your theater experience into the VR, and what things did you have to unlearn or say, I can't use here?
I think the feeling of that big performance for Flora in particular, and in some scenes and some of the particularly kind of emotional driven scenes, I think the theatre training helped because there's a sense of the stamina that you need to have and the way to keep it fresh because, with a stage show, you do it over and over again. It's the same with takes. I think in terms of things that hurt me is that sometimes it's difficult to then draw it in. And I think here, and the balance for VR is finding something in the middle ground, is finding the big boldness of a theatre show and the subtlety sometimes of a screen performance, which I don't always have, I feel. So sometimes you have to relearn some of those things and try and find the balance. But I think we then started to find a new way of working in this particular medium, which did find the balance and which you adapt to pretty quickly. So I don't feel there was anything I necessarily had to relearn or unlearn, because you somehow just switch into this new mode and work from there, really.
The entire performance was motion captured. Do you feel that you had to sort of exaggerate some of your movements or even facial expressions so they were captured properly? Or did you have to go the other way and not exaggerate so much? How does that portion work from an actor working in VR?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge for me actually was the sort of the use of your hands. They don't capture at all, really, and they're all sort of animated in. So you can only do so much. And also the thing for me is it's a very natural thing for us as human beings. We touch our face a lot. You know, we wipe tears from our eyes, we put our head in our hands, and you can't do any of that. You can't, because you can't put anything in front of the camera that's going to take away from the capture of your face. And I think for me, I have quite big, bold facial expressions, which translate, I think, reasonably well for VR, better than they do for screen, for TV or for film. So I feel for me, it was quite a happy medium and worked well for that. But I think the biggest challenge was hands, because you suddenly become aware that you're so dependent on them in some ways, but they're completely useless to you in this sort of version of reality. So you have to find other ways of using your body to convey what you feel. And that in itself is a new challenge, but quite an exciting one in a way.
So as an actress, do you feel that because of all this technology and currently limitations, do you have to be more technologically savvy, not so much understand how to hook up the equipment and how to run it, but how that equipment affects your performance?
Yeah, you do. But I think you maybe have a couple of stumbling blocks to start with, where you're adjusting around it, and then you suddenly second nature and it all becomes a lot easier. I don't necessarily think you have to have had a solid training in it for a prolonged period of time before, because I think your instincts as an actor and then the sort of practical side of it will kick in as well. But I think it does help to just get a handle on it and just to be aware that it could throw you, because I think it does. And I think initially it does throw everyone, because you become hyper aware almost of what you're doing. And it's very distracting when you then catch yourself full face, big bold shot on a monitor. That can be very distracting, but you learn to adapt to that as well. So I think there's a balance. I think you need to be aware of it, tune into it, and then almost forget about it.
Were you able to preview your acting in VR after you were done with the motion capture, so you know if you needed to adjust anything?
No, we just sort of do a bit of playback to make sure nothing had sort of gone beyond the perimeters.
But that was the live playback, not the VR.
Yeah. So everything then was just, we just trusted that it was going to work. And then a couple of weeks, I think we started, I think it was sort of week 3 of the shoot, we got to step in a little bit, a very brief look at a very basic overview of how it was kind of working. But no, it was very much hand that over and trust the good work of everyone else, because it was such an incredible team and such a wonderful collaborative experience that you just trust that they're going to work their magic and it's going to be great.
How much input did you have in the way the avatar itself, the mannerisms and movements of the avatar, since you're the actress with understanding that character really well? Were you able to work in post-production later while they're creating the avatar and putting all your motion capture into that avatar? Were you able to give your input as to, well, I don't think she would move like that. I don't think that's the way she would react. I mean, any kind of input on that?
What you see when you're playing The Invisible Hours, or you're sort of viewing it as an experience, is all of those movements are our movements. Nothing was really added or taken away from that at all. So everything that we've done is what you're seeing, which is beautiful, because in games you might do one or the other. Traditionally you maybe just do the voice, and I've seen some great things and reviews where they go, the voice acting is brilliant, and not many people know that we are the full character. So there was no real need to sort of go back and adjust any of those things. Maybe a few things for timing, speed up a walk, slow down a walk, or something like that. But the rest of it is pretty much us as we were. And in terms of the look and the design and everything was pretty much in place for us to see before we started shooting. So we knew what clothes we were meant to be wearing, even though we were in these very distracting black suits. And we knew what our hair was doing and the other things we might have on us. And there was a lot of talk about how things would move, for example, Flora's skirt, how it would move in the wind. So we knew all those things before we shot. So that helped us, I think, in a way, because we had all those in mind. Yeah,
and that's interesting you say that, because I'm assuming that would affect your performance as well. So if you're told you're wearing this super heavy coat, your movements are probably going to be a bit more restricted than if you were told you're in shorts and a t-shirt.
Yeah, exactly. So we were given all the information and the idea about what we'd be wearing and far more about the period and things like that before we started to inform our choices. And we actually started, well, me and Fiona started with corsets and raised shoes, heels, to fit within the period as well. So that was all under the black suit. So we were strapped in under the black suit with corsets and heels. So yeah, it was quite full on.
So what about from the directing point of view? What are some tips for directors that are looking to get into VR from an actor's point of view, right? What would you tell a director? Hey, make sure you do this, but don't do that.
I think that's really difficult, actually, because I think the creative process and the vision behind VR can be quite individual. So I think maybe it is that. Maybe it's having a bold idea and trusting it. Because I think that, for me, Rob had this incredible idea and he trusted his vision, and we all and everyone at Skeeler trusted it completely and went with it. So I think you have to have something, you really want to tell a story as well. And I think that's the thing. VR is, maybe an offshoot of immersive theatre. And the best way to tell a story is in the 360, is to think about all those different perspectives and what is it you're trying to say and what's the information you're trying to give away and what are you trying to hide. And it is thinking about the bigger picture and what is it you're trying to get across, which I think is more difficult because in film, we're looking at one thing at one time. We don't have the potential to look at everything and every background.
Give us some examples of his directing and what kind of instructions or directions did he provide to you that allow you to give the best performance?
Rob is so incredibly supportive. So he's never going to say that was horrendous, but he's going to say, I think you can do better. I think you can give me more on that. I think the way he directs is with care. He, as I mentioned before, is very intuitive. So he instinctively knows what is going to work for each actor. And I think that is incredibly rare. You don't have the luxury of that very often. So, for example, one scene, me and the other actor in the scene, we have very different ways of playing things, very different ways of going about preparing. But somehow Rob managed to give us both enough to work with individually to make it work, to make a marriage of our different approaches. But I don't think many other people could do that. I think they'd have their way and you have to go with that. Whereas Rob bends to the actor to get the best out of them rather than enforcing his own particular style of direction. He naturally supports what you're doing, but just a couple of words of encouragement can get something completely different. He also gave us each a little note about something we should carry with us as a character, the thing that drives them. So each of us had this little note with a brief description of what that drive was, and we weren't to tell anyone else. We were just to have it in the back of our minds. So occasionally when he wanted to get something else out of us, he'd ask us to think about that, and then we try again. And often that would unlock something as well.
What about actors wanting to move into VR 360? What tips would you give them, or absolutely you need to do this and know this, whatever that this is?
I think it's really difficult because it's such a different way of working. But I think having an awareness of your physicality and in the round, thinking of everything as 360 rather than one-off shots or how am I going to look in this bit, you have to really think from head to toe as this other character and how do you feel? How do you convey to everyone in front of you, behind you, to each side of you, what it is you're feeling at that moment, but without giving too much away? It's really tricky, but I think there's no one direct route or way of going about it. I think everyone will bring their own experience to it. I mean, with this cast, we had some of us who'd worked mainly in stage, the other half who'd worked mainly in film. And between us, we somehow got there. But I think we all bring our own unique experience to it. And because it does force us to think in such a different way, you just have to be on your toes and you have to be prepared to have anything thrown at you in a way.
What's the thing you enjoyed the most about working specifically in VR?
just loved the whole setup. I loved the otherworldly nature of it. I almost loved not having anything and everything there, so that you could almost create all those things in your mind's eye. And I think I just loved this kind of spectacle of it all. And it was something so very different to what I was used to. You know, I'm used to going out there every night and doing the same show, but not really knowing what's going to happen. But here you have a chance to really get to grips with a character and to try something completely different. And I think I just enjoyed every day for different reasons, whether it be the emotional scenes or the quieter background scenes. I think you learn something with it. I certainly learned something every day on every shoot we did.
What did you like the least or feel could be improved, specifically as it relates to VR and acting?
I think the connection with your fellow actor is so important. You can't help it. You've got a camera in front of your face, but it is, especially at first, really difficult to play those scenes because you can't see everyone the way you want to, and you can't play the scenes and you can't have that connection that you want. And that is really difficult. You know, from the test shoot to the actual shoot, the technology had already jumped within the space of a couple of months. So I'm sure there will be more and more progression in how we shoot things in VR and motion capture and all of those things and the setup. But I think it's as an actor, you want to make a connection, and you can't make a connection here with anyone else but the other actors you're working with. If you can't see them clearly, it's tricky.
Yeah, I could see that. So what would you like VR to be like in the future?
I'd certainly like it to be more accessible. I think that's what we're missing at the moment. You know, so many people would love to play The Invisible Hours in VR, but they're just not able to. A lot of people have played the flat version, but you don't get the full experience. So for it to be more accessible and for it to be more commonplace, I think, in a way, because the minute you step into VR and have a VR experience, I don't know anyone that's come out and gone, wow, that was rubbish. Everyone's come out and gone, oh my God, that is something else. So for it to be more commonplace, to be more widely used and more integrated in everyday life in some way, not so that we're all sort of wandering around with it instead of real life, but I think there's a place for it in other sectors, but I think we're a little way off that.
Yeah, but we'll get there for sure.
Yeah. Definitely.
Well, Catherine, it's been a complete pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for sharing your experience with The Invisible Hours.
And you, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was great. If people want to get a hold of you, do you want to give like a contact info?
I'm on all the sort of socials, on Twitter at Katie Purcell, and on Instagram there as well. You know, a lot of people contact me with messages about other things I do on there. So that's my main place, really, sort of across the board.
Are you working on a new experience that you can share, or are you looking to do more like these?
Certainly looking to do more. I think the market hasn't really taken off in the way we'd all hope. So it's not as easy to get back into as you'd like. So I'm still predominantly working on my next couple of projects are stage-based, but I'm certainly looking and would love to get into more now.
Very cool. All right. Well, Catherine, thank you so much again for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And to the rest of you, I'm glad you were here with us. Just a quick reminder, if you want to access all of our live events, tutorials, practice assets, podcast interviews, videos, and more, register for free at howtocreatevr.com. Finally, if you want to attend our live events in virtual reality, join us inside Altspace VR. Just visit howtocreatevr.com/AltspaceVR and subscribe to our channel. So until the next episode, I'm Marcelo Lewin. Cheers, everyone.